Hi everyone, good afternoon, happy Sunday, happy Cabernet Franc Day. Thank you so much for jumping on today. Oh good, some people are saying hello. I'm waving. This has been a long time since I've done a live, so I'm a little bit out of practice, but it's a very exciting day, of course. It's Cab Franc Day, and I am excited to dive into one of my all-time favorite wines. And I've talked about Olga Raffault a number of times and Les Picasses, and I thought for this occasion it would be a great opportunity for me to jump into an older vintage of Les Picasses, because this is truly one of the great age-worthy examples of Cabernet Franc coming from the Loire Valley. And so many great people are here. So anyway, for this live, obviously this will be posted to my feed once it's finished. So if you have to jump off or other things come up, this will be posted to my feed at the end. I'm not sure how long this is going to go. Hopefully not not an hour or something like that, but we'll see. And I would encourage everyone to jump in with questions. Let me know what you're drinking. If you have any questions about this wine, the Loire Valley, anywhere for that matter, as it relates to Cabernet Franc, I want this to be a fantastic opportunity for folks to jump in and learn and share our love for this awesome grape. So before I get into it, one thing that I kind of always like to highlight here is I know I spend a lot of time on my feed talking about the Loire Valley, and I dive really deep into the Loire Valley as it relates to their wines. And there's a big reason for this, because this project, when I launched it 2 years ago today, in fact, today's the 2-year anniversary of Franc Chronicles going live. And the reason why Loire Valley is such a focus is because this is the region globally that where Cabernet Franc is a star. Unlike Bordeaux, unlike other parts of France or anywhere else in the world for that matter, here in the Loire Valley, Cabernet Franc is the star, at least in the central Loire. Chinon, Bourgueil, st-nicolas-de-bourgueil, saumur-champigny, saumur, these appellations. This is where Cabernet Franc is the star. And my goal with this project was to really talk about Cabernet Franc as the star variety. So it only is fitting that I look at the Loire as deeply as I do. And I've got some wicked assets lined up to show you guys today in relation to this wine. So I know people are joining, and I'm going to get into it because I don't want to delay too much in the event that people are catching this as a replay. And thank you, Scott, for the kind words. So let me get into it. So Olga Raffault, this is probably one of the most historical producers, certainly one of those benchmark producers in Chinon. It's 5 generations of the family now that has been working these vineyards, and they are based in Beaumont-en-Véron. So just a little bit of a history for those that aren't familiar with Olga Raffault. So this estate really came to be with the marriage of Olga Raffault, excuse me, my French is like a little rusty, Olga Raffault, that was her maiden name. And in 1931, she married Pierre Raffault. And with that marriage, they both came from 2 polyculture families in Beaumont-en-Véron, which is a very common practice back during the 20s and 30s, where you had, vegetables like asparagus was very common and still is quite common in this part of the Loire Valley, livestock, other crops, as well as some vines. So Olga came from a family in Beaumont-en-Véron that had a polyculture farm, and Pierre also came from a family with a polyculture estate. So their marriage in 1931 brought together their vines. So they started with about 3 hectares of vines. And this is really the beginnings of Olga Raffault. Now, where things take a little bit of a turn is Pierre passed away suddenly in 1947 at a relatively young age. And at the time, Olga had 2 kids and this estate that they were working. And if it wasn't for one person, we don't know what would have perhaps happened to Domaine Olga Raffault, but there was one gentleman by the name of Ernest Zeininger, who was a German prisoner of war. So he was captured during World War II, and as part of his sentence, if you will, being of German descent, they sentenced him to work the land in the Loire Valley, specifically here in Beaumont-en-Véron, and he was working for Olga Raffault for the estate at the time. So Pierre passes away, and here is Olga with 2 children and this estate. And Ernest, now the war is over, this is 1947. Ernest has fallen in love with this area. He's decided not to go back to Germany. And if it wasn't for Ernest and kind of taking Olga under his wing and being somewhat of the protector and the, kind of assuming the role of patriarch in a way of this domain, who knows what would have happened. But under Ernest's guidance, basically they grew the estate together. There was a shift in focus in terms of the vines and working with more vineyards as opposed to less. So over the course of the 1950s, they grew the estate to about 23 hectares worth of vines, all predominantly in the Véron Peninsula, so Sauvignon-Véron and Beaumont-en-Véron, which is pretty incredible to have grown the estate to that size over just a short period of time. And really, under Ernest's guidance, this is really what takes Olga Raffault as the domain that we kind of know it now into the next phase. So during the 50s and the 60s, Ernest worked tirelessly in the vineyards. He eschewed all chemical agriculture, this is the time, the 50s was the time when the agricultural, the synthetic agricultural revolution was taking place. The chemical agricultural revolution was taking place, not just in France, but really everywhere. So rather than, subscribing to the chemicals and all these things that were the newfangled stuff that was available, Ernest said, nah, I'm out with that. I'm going to just stick to my traditional ways of farming the land the right way, the organic way. So their vineyards, although they've been certified organic for some time, they've been really working these vineyards organically since the beginning, which is pretty incredible. So under Ernest's guidance, there was a shift in terms of the quality of the estate as well. So he started to employ practices like hand harvesting, fermentation with élevage in oak, and then doing some longer macerations, focusing on quality as opposed to quantity. And these are some of the important things that Ernest put into play in the 1950s, 60s, and into the 70s in terms of this estate, and what's really helped to bring Olga Raffault to where it is today. So Olga eventually passed away, and her son Jean took over. She had 2 kids, as I said. So Jean Raffault took over. And today we are now in the hands of Sylvie, who's Jean's daughter. Sylvie, and now her son as well, Arnaud. And also Sylvie's husband, Eric, is also involved in the estate, which is amazing. And they've, like I said, they've kind of pretty much, like, if you're looking at Chinon as a whole in terms of different estates and stylistic choices and how you would kind of group different estates. If there was a state that I would say represents kind of the old guard, the traditional estates of Chinon, Olga Raffault is certainly one of them in terms of just the overall profile in their wines. There's something really incredibly humble about their entire range of wines. And there's something, like I said, very traditional. There's no modern polish to it. There's that air of, I'm trying to think of all the right words that I want to use here, but traditional is the best way that I can describe the Olga Raffault domain. Today, they have around 24, checking my notes. They have around 24 hectares of Cabernet Franc vines, and they have 1 hectare of Chenin. And they have 3 cuvées parcellaires that they do. So they have their domaine wine. They do a fantastic rosé, which if you've not had Olga Raffault's Chinon rosé, go seek it out. Maybe not 2021 vintage. I'm sure that's probably all sold out everywhere. But oh, definitely there is. Well, Cabernet Franc in nature has a little bit of rustic edge to it, but that's what makes it sexy. So anyway, they have 3 cuvées parcellaires, which are the cuvées where they're doing the single vineyard expressions. So the one that is right at the domaine. So the domaine is based in Sauvignon-en-Véron, and I have some maps and stuff, so just sit tight because the maps are coming. But Sauvignon-en-Véron is where the domaine is based, and one of their cuvées parcellaires is Les Barnabés, and this is right next door to the domaine. And then they have 2 other cuvées parcellaires that are coming from Beaumont-en-Véron, and these we have Les Pouilles, and we also have Les Picasses, which is of course the one that we are looking at today. And I have had this wine in a number of different, scenarios, different vintages, younger, older. Actually, it was this Les Picasses that was one of those wines that was very much a aha wine for me. I had a 1982 vintage several years ago at a restaurant in New York City, and it kind of like, it was like the light bulb went off, and I was like, this is it. Like, I was serious about Cabernet Franc before, but it was that wine that kind of like pushed me into like a completely different stratosphere as it relates to this project and kind of where I am today. Let's see how we're doing. We're 15 minutes in. So let's get into the nerdy stuff, because I know you're all like super jazzed to do the nerdy bits. So let me show you. So basically what I want to, actually, before I get into that, just a little preface. So I'm going to cover off a little bit about the vineyard, just provide some context for where we're going with this. I'm going to provide a little bit of information about the vineyard, and then, sort of Beaumont-en-Véron as the commune in general, and where we kind of are in Chinon. And then some details about the vineyard, because this vineyard is pretty important. And then I'll cover a bit of the winemaking, and then we'll get into the wines. And like I said, I'm going to try and keep my eye on the screen and ask questions. And there is like a little question box, like there's a little like a question mark thing that you can type your question in, because it's likely I probably won't see it as it's scrolling up and down the thing. So if you hit the little question mark button at the bottom of the screen and type in your question, that way I won't miss any questions in case folks have any. So without further ado, let's get to the nerdy bits. First map up. So where are we exactly in Chinon? So this is a little snippet from Google Earth to give you sort of the wider view of where we are in the Loire, kind of in the central Loire Valley, but really in Chinon. So the Chinon village is down to the southwest. You can kind of see it there on the screen. Les Picasses is about 3.5 kilometers north, directly north of the Vienne River. You can almost see in the background of this photo here, Bourgueil, La Chapelle-sur-Loire, which are communes, and Benet, all communes in the Bourgueil AOP. But that just gives you kind of a layout of where we are here in terms of the Chinon appellation. We're on the north side of the Vienne River, which is the right bank of the Vienne River. We're in the commune of Beaumont-en-Véron. So let me dive. We're going to go a little deeper now. So here we are in Beaumont-en-Véron, and this is Les Picasses. Thank you to the French cadastre system for allowing me to draw cool maps like this. So this is Les Picasses. So we are in the commune of Beaumont-en-Véron, as I said, and we are very close. You can see kind of on the left side of your screen there, that's the Beaumont-en-Véron village. So we're very close to the village itself. And this UD, as you can see, based on the 0.252 square kilometers, this is about a 25 hectare vineyard, which is a fair size. That translates to, who's on the queue with acreage here? I think that's probably what, 65-ish acres, maybe? Like, that's a pretty fair size as far as a vineyard is concerned. But this is important to note because in terms of Les Picasses as a whole, Olga Raffault, this is really the reference in terms of the bottling of this wine. But in general, there's actually a lot of other vignerons that have parcels here. And this vineyard has been really to back it up a little bit, the Chinon appellation right now is in the process of putting together, they're in the process of acknowledging the top vineyards in Chinon. So they're putting together these little monographs of these of the key vineyards in Chinon. La Croix-Boissée is another one. Les Picasses is one. So they are basically doing the work right now. Thank you, Niels. 61.7 acres for those that think in acres and not hectares. So for right now, the Chinon appellation is right now doing work to elevate some of these top vineyards in Chinon to, we'll call them Grand Cru status. And this is really important because historically, we've always, a lot of people think of Cabernet Franc and Chinon wines and a lot of these appellations in the Loire Valley as wines that are meant for early consumption. But there are a lot of really exceptional vineyards out there that can make wines that are more for the really more for the longer haul, and Les Picasses is one of them. So the history of this vineyard, it dates back in terms of its status as an important vineyard in Chinon. We're talking going back to the 15th century here, which is pretty incredible. The name Picasse, Picasses, it comes from the word pic, P-I-C, and this referred to the tools that were used way back in the day, that were these little two-pronged tools that folks used to work the soils in the vineyard, and that's where the name comes from. But as I said, we are here in Beaumont-en-Véron, and this is a really special part of the Chinon appellation, and I'm going to put up another map here just to give you a broader overview of where we are, because we are on the Véron Peninsula here, but it's a bit more of a complicated story. So where's my rad geology? I know you're all so excited to see some geology nerdy stuff. So Beaumont-en-Véron is this commune that is part of the Véron Peninsula. There's two other communes that make up the Véron Peninsula. We have Savigny-en-Véron, which is kind of to the west here, and then we have the commune of Avoine. And you'll notice here on this picture that there's two kind of really cool distinctions in terms of the geology here. Basically, if you look just where that orange circle is, that is Les Picasses. And if you look to just above that, there's like a line that kind of goes through just around the village of Avoine. And what that line is that is a fault. And that fault line, which is of course a fault is, if Loic is on here, I'm not gonna get my geology terminology right, but so the fault basically is like where there's been a shift in terms of tectonic activity, and that, faults kind of create changes in the bedrock. So there's a fault here at Avoine. So the communes of Savigny-en-Véron and Avoine are actually kind of at a lower lying elevation, and the bedrock there is completely different. So that's where we have predominantly these very deep, sandy, silty, alluvial soils, very flat land as well. Jordan, that's super cute. Give you the dirt. I'm giving the dirt. So Savigny-en-Véron and Avoine have this very flat landscape here with these deep, silty, sandy soils. This is where we tend to see better vineyards for earlier drinking styles of Chinon. But because of this, as I knock over the bottle of wine, that would be good, right? This is what happens when you talk with your hands too much. But anyway, because of this fault, we get to Beaumont-en-Véron. We've kind of taken a step up a little bit in terms of our elevation. So now we're kind of at elevations between like 35 to like 80 meters above sea level now. The whole landscape in Beaumont-en-Véron is this undulating, like ripply terroir. So there's all these hills that undulate down to the southeast towards the Chinon village. And So here at Beaumont-en-Véron, as you can see from this image, the whole like geology landscape of this commune is completely different. Now we have these different gradations of the Turonian Tuffeaux chalk, which is the cool stuff. This is the chalk that it really is responsible for all the chateaux in the Loire Valley. This is what we all talk about when we think of these calcaire soils and these clay limestone soils. And so here in Beaumont-en-Véron, you can kind of see the different patterns of the Turonian Tuffeaux chalk. And this is important because these, the middle Turonian Tuffeaux, which is kind of, I would say it's like a lime green color on this map here. The upper Turonian Tuffeaux is more like a, I don't know, it's what color would I call that? It's like a pale bluey-ish, bluey gray color. So the middle Turonian and the upper Turonian Tuffeaux show themselves differently throughout the Chinon appellations, just as we can see here in Beaumont-en-Véron. And it's important, these Tuffeaux have different properties. They have different ways they regulate water, for example. The upper Turonian yellow Tuffeaux is known to be a little bit denser. It has much better drainage, whereas the middle Turonian Tuffeaux is a bit more of a spongier Tuffeaux chalk, so it absorbs and it regulates water a little bit differently. So depending on where your vines are and what bedrock you have and how these soils are derived, your vines are going to respond differently. Yes, undulate. It is a very sexy word, isn't it? We're just bringing all the sexy things. We're bringing dirt. We're bringing anyway. Cabernet Franc. It's like a sexy grape. But anyway, so. This is the picture that we're dealing with here in terms of bedrock geology in Beaumont-en-Véron. And this is the stuff that I think is freaking awesome when it relates to diving into to these vineyards and exploring these wines the way I do. So I'm going to put up just another sort of smaller picture here of diving in a little bit further. So here we're zooming in on the Les Picasses, and hopefully this is you can kind of see this pretty well from your vantage point. But I've used sort of an overlay here of the cadastre system, so if you can see faint little orange lines on this sort of image here, those are the parcels. So that's how the parcels have been divided up, which is amazing. So as I said before, this is a pretty large vineyard, and there's kind of multiple parts to it, as you can clearly see. You can almost see in that image that there's a line that, this is where I wish I had like some sort of pointer mechanism or something like this, but there's a road or like a little like pathway in the lower third of that vineyard. And that creates a distinction between really the upper portion of Les Picasses and the lower portion of Les Picasses. So that lower portion, that lower third is actually on a southwest facing slope. And that southwest facing slope is actually pretty steep. Like it's a decent grade. I would say it's probably, when I was there in May, it's a decent, like I would say it's probably a good 45% grade. Like that south facing slope is pretty steep. And then the upper portion of the vineyard, what's interesting about the upper portion of the vineyard is it's almost like a convex shape. So it kind of goes up and then it comes down. So the very back quarter or third of Les Picasses is actually facing a little bit more north, which is kind of interesting. So again, depending on, I did when was it? Oh, I guess it was over a year ago now. I did a live talking about Les Pouilles, Clos-Jards, Les Pouilles, and that's another big vineyard. And we see different expressions from Les Pouilles, just as we see other expressions from Les Picasses, but it is a complicated picture because this is a big site. You've got south-facing slopes. Where are the parcels? What kind of bedrock are we on? What is the, what is the topsoil as well? So it's a complicated picture. What's interesting about Les Picasses is Olga Raffault has 7 hectares here, and they are the largest landholder in Les Picasses. And I often mention when I'm talking about Les Picasses is that if you needed a benchmark expression of Les Picasses, really it's Olga Raffault's bottling that is probably the benchmark profile of Les Picasses because they do have the largest portion of the vineyard. In terms of, what else did I want to talk about here? I'm just reviewing my notes because, I'm getting old. So, you know, my memory isn't quite what it was before. So in terms of topsoils, let's talk. Actually, you know what? Before I talk about topsoils, let's talk about the bedrock, because I have another picture, and I know I get too excited about this shit. But anyway, so we are back on the geology front here, and now I'm getting some nice sunlight coming in. That's great. Here we are seeing Les Picasses, but now we see what's underneath Les Picasses. And as you can see, the vast majority of this vineyard is on the Upper Tronian yellow Tuffeaux chalk. And there's so many amazing people here. Actually, maybe I should jump in, and before I get into the bedrock stuff, maybe I should, oh my gosh, questions. So many questions. Question, it'll be, not a question, but aw, this is awesome. Oh, look, everybody's drinking some really cool stuff today. Oh, this makes me so happy. Oh, nice. Anyway, everybody's drinking awesome wines. I saw someone was drinking rants. Rats is amazing. So anyway, let me get into this and let me deal with my sunshine situation. Oh my gosh. I was like, because knowing my luck, I will have like sunlight in my eyes here. If I don't shift at some point. Actually, I should be thankful, because it's December in Ontario. Sometimes sunshine doesn't happen for days and days and days at a time. So anyway, getting into the bedrock here, getting back to the dirty stuff. So we are on the Upper Tronian yellow Tuffeaux chalk bedrock for the majority of the vineyard, except for that little sliver at the bottom of the slope of the south-facing slope, where we are on the middle Tronian white Tuffeaux chalk. So for the most part, the influence here is the Upper Tronian yellow Tuffeaux chalk. And then in terms of the topsoils here, basically in the lower portion of the vineyard, we have, it's like a sandy, silty clay mix. And then we have in that convex portion of the upper part of the vineyard, you're seeing more silty sands up there. So in terms of this vineyard, again, the depth of the topsoils is relatively shallow. So we're talking at about 70 centimeters. This is when we start to hit the Tuffeaux. So there's not a lot of topsoil here. So why does that matter? Well, that matters because it's going to impact water availability, but it's also going to mean that in the finished wine, we're going to have a little bit more of the impact from the Tuffeaux chalk. So that's important to keep in mind, and why this wine kind of tastes the way it does. One last thing that I want to talk about before I move on to I feel like the time, I've already been at this for 30 minutes, my goodness. I'm going to show one more shot, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about Olga Raffaux's parcels. Hold on a second. You guys are amazing. So, I know, yeah, this is like so intense, but like I said, this is, I feel like I'm like flying through this. But anyway, this is showing you sort of the variability in terms of the soil types and the terroirs. These are individual terroir units. And I think they've identified, I think in the Chinon appellation, they've identified something like, I think it's like 60 or 70 different singular terroir units within this appellation, which is incredible. And in terms of Les Picasses, it's hard. I know the resolution on this image is pretty shit, but in terms of Les Picasses as a whole, as much as the bedrock is that Upper Tronian yellow Tuffeaux chalk, there's a lot of variability within that Upper Tronian yellow Tuffeaux chalk and how it is comprised and layered, and the erosion over time, as well as the decomposition of the Tronian Tuffeaux chalk over time as well. But I like to show this because even just in Beaumont-en-Véron, you can see here there's a lot of variability from site to site, from parcel to parcel. So this matters, as I said, mostly from a viticultural standpoint. So, does it matter in terms of the expression of the finished wines? It's hard to say. But Cabernet Franc is a grape variety, is a super site-sensitive grape. So how you work the grape on and your vines on these different soils really will reflect in the finished wines, because some of these soils are more vigorous, you'll get higher yields, some retain water differently, some will have different you'll have to choose different rootstock choices as well. My friend Niels and I, who is in Sweden and works for a winery in southern Sweden, we talk all the time about how nobody talks about the influence of rootstocks on the finished wine. And the rootstock matters. That's what connects the vine to the it's what's in the soil. So depending on the type of soil that we have, the rootstock choice will be different. This will influence nutrient uptake and all these other things. So I know this is all very nerdy, but basically what I'm trying to say is whenever it comes to Cabernet Franc, soil matters. Because if the soils and the terroir is at a balance with the vine, then that's when those pyrazines can kind of rear their ugly head. So before I, as a final kind of dive here into Les Picasses, just a few more notes about the Olga Raffault parcels. So as I said, they have about 7 hectares here. So they are the largest landholder. The majority of their parcels are in the western portion of the vineyard. So like the western half of Les Picasses. And then their average age of vines are around 35 or so years of age. And their parcels, actually, the original parcels here at Les Picasses have been in the family since 1928, which is amazing. So they've been farming this vineyard for nearly 100 years, which I think is it's just so cool. So I think with that said, let's talk about the wine. As I just feel like I went through that was a whirlwind. If I missed anything that on this vineyard or on the area or anything like this as it relates to, just again, hit me up with a question. But before I get into, actually, no, hold up. Because we got to do this. So this is 2001 vintage. So this wine is 21 years old. And this is the oldest Les Picasses that I have in my cellar. So I'm relieved that it's alive and singing and happy. I was a little nervous because you just never know. I was also nervous that it might have been corked, but it wasn't, so we're good. So 2001, how was this vintage? Wasn't a great vintage. It was probably a good vintage, like a good B, maybe a B plus kind of a vintage. They had some more rainfall in the Touraine area in terms of the summertime. It was a little warmer. So in general, again, not like knock it out of the park, A plus, vintage of the century kind of thing, but not a complete loss. And I think what's important to remember with regards to vintages, particularly where we see vintage variation, like in more northerly latitude, more marginal growing zones like the Loire Valley and other places where we do see vintage variation, I think sometimes producer and vineyard trumps vintage, in my opinion, a lot of the time. Not all the time, but certainly a lot of the time. So even in, let's say, less favorable vintages, if you know the vineyard, if you know the producer, you can pretty much be certain that you're going to get a good wine. So that's something to keep in mind, is like everybody talks about good vintages, bad vintages and things like this, but sometimes I think that conversation can get a bit overblown. And if the producer is good, if the site is good, then you are going to get a good wine. And for me, Les Picasses always is, it's just one of those sites that regardless of the vintage, warm vintage, cool vintage, the way they farm that vineyard, working organically, doing the right things in the vineyard in terms of their viticultural practices, and the vineyard kind of helps to keep this wine intact and keep even in a less favorable vintage, it produces a really outstanding wine. So should I talk about winemaking? Probably. Checking my notes. forgive me. So from a winemaking perspective, so I talked about the vintage, we talked about the vineyard. Let's talk about winemaking. So from a winemaking perspective, this is all hand harvested fruit. They work all destemmed as well. The fermentation is done in stainless steel, and they're working with indigenous yeast. And this wine sees a longer time on skins, so about 30 days on average. And they will do some pigeage because they can work the fruit. And I'm still trying to learn some of the specifics with regards to these technical elements of winemaking, but they can work the fruit because they're getting a long hang time. I guess that's something I should note about this vineyard is this vineyard, because of where it's located in Beaumont-en-Véron, it's set back a little bit. So Sylvie, when we had an exchange about this vineyard way back, whenever that was, she said that they get really long hang time here. So this is usually their last site to be harvested. And because of that long gradual hang time, that's allowing for the tannins and the tannins in the seeds, the tannins in the skins, that's allowing for full phenolic maturity of the grapes. And that means that they can actually work the grapes and the skins a little bit more in terms of maceration. So they do some pigeage or punch downs during the fermentation. And then in terms of aging, this would be aged in larger barrels. So they work with foudre, so 50 hectoliter oak foudre. And this seems about, I think it's did I even put the maturation time? No, I didn't. Oh, 1 year. 1 year in foudre. And then what's important also to note about Olga Raffault and their practices with Les Picasses is they do bottle age at the estate. So the current release in the market, like in Europe, in the US, I believe is the 2016 vintage, which is pretty cool. So they are holding that wine back and releasing it when they think it is ready. And if you ever visit the domaine as well, which I would highly recommend folks do if they're in the Loire Valley, usually they have some older examples of Les Picasses open to taste at the domaine. And when I was there in May, we tasted, Tom, if Tom is on, Tom was with me, and we tasted the 09 and the 2010 Les Picasses. Oh, and I should also note, which I forgot to mention, in the best vintages, Olga Raffault does another bottling from Les Picasses, which is coming from just their south-facing slope, so that their parcels that are on the south-facing slope. In the best vintages, they will do another bottling from Les Picasses that they call La Singulière. So if you see that on a shelf somewhere, that is also from Les Picasses, but they do that, they kind of separate that wine out as a singular bottle, which I think is kind of cool. So, like I said, this is a great wine for the cellar. If anybody is enjoying this right now, if you've whatever vintage, hit me up. But now that I've been talking for what feels like an eternity, I'm going to, and people are still here, which is amazing. You guys all rock so much. I'm so grateful for everyone. So let's get into this wine without further ado. So the nose has a sort of medium intensity. There's a little bit of a perfume here. It's a touch shy on the nose, and this has been open for a couple of hours now. In terms of the nose, obviously we're getting lots of tertiary development here with 21 years on this wine. What's really jumping out for me is red fruits, first and foremost. So the cooler energy of the vintage is coming through, a lot of sweet tart fruits. So there's like dried cherries, there's a bit of dried cranberries as well. There's also a really interesting note that like a dried green fig note, which is kind of interesting, but not like, the black mission figs, but a dried green fig, which is kind of interesting. And then in terms of the pyrazines, this wine is definitely an earthier one, a savory wine, which is what I love. So there's all these other layers that kind of come with this wine that is different from, the typical fruits that we think of. So there's like cedar leaves, there's some dried herbs here. There's like desiccated violets and rose petals. There's a bit of potting soil here. It's really quite cool. There's also a touch of mushroom. Another thing that I sometimes get with older examples of Cabernet Franc is a bit of like blood orange peel, like either blood orange juice or sometimes like a blood orange peel, like dried peel, which is kind of interesting. And I'm totally getting it on this. And then there is this tea energy in this wine. So it's like a mix of, and I'm not a tea expert by any stretch of the imagination, but it's like rooibos, but there's also like a little bit of a black tea thing happening in here, but it's really quite cool. And there's a lot going on the nose. I'm surprised people haven't asked more questions. Well, this wine is great. So on the palate, the acidity is really bright, kind of crunchy in a way, which is kind of cool. But there is like a snappiness to the acidity, which I really, really like. Yeah. So in terms of the tannins are firm still. There's still a good amount of tannin here. They have a bit of a granular texture, kind of reminiscent of like I'm wearing cashmere at the moment, so it's actually kind of cashmere-like, the tannins. Important information to know. Allison is wearing a cashmere sweater. So it's like, yeah, it's almost kind of cashmere-like in terms of the texture. There's a fuzziness, like a granular kind of texture. So it's not quite velvet, but there is a little bit of an edge to the tannins, which is kind of cool. Like there is that slight kind of rustic edge to this wine, which doesn't suggest to me that it was coming from like a warmer, more solar vintage, if you will. Sometimes we use that expression for those hot vintages. They're a bit more solaire is the expression in French. So there's a lot coming from this wine that is suggesting a slightly cooler vintage. And those tannins and that granular nature and that slight kind of rustic edge to the wine is kind of showing that vintage characteristic a little bit. Cheers. Aw. Thank you, Ariel. You're a sweetheart. How long do you think we should hold on to the 14? Oh, you've got lots of time. 14 was a fantastic vintage, very classic vintage. So it will likely need a little bit more time to show because it wasn't a super warm vintage, but a very classic vintage. So that's not going to go, you've got tons of, oh, Chris. Nice to see you, Chris. Ariel, you've got lots of time for that 14. So if you wanted to tuck into it now, by all means, rock it. Make sure you decant that baby, but it'll be fine. Put that in the wine fridge and revisit it in 10 years' time or something like that. One other thing that I wanted to note about the palate is the palate on this wine is spicy, and I like it. There's like, I know we always talk about bell pepper in Cabernet Franc, and I hate, it's like Allison's pet peeve is when people like just toss out the green bell pepper because it seemed, I don't know, maybe because it's easy and people always associate green bell pepper with Cabernet Franc, but it's much more complex than that. So, and for me, green pepper, it's a little bit of a red flag for me sometimes, but there's other evolutions of capsicum as a note. So green bell, just like we have different varieties of apples, different varieties of mangoes, different varieties of peaches and cherries and all these kinds of things, there is not one pepper that defines the world. So forgive this rant. Green bell pepper is a thing, but there are other peppers. Lots. Ask anybody from Mexico. How many hundreds of thousands of peppers are there on the planet? Probably more than we even know. So anyway, my little rant here is that don't jump to say green bell pepper when you're like rhyming off tasting notes for Cabernet Franc. Try to find something else to use. Just, dig deeper, try different peppers. But anyway, what's interesting about this, how many Scoville? This is pretty low on the Scoville scale, Stephen, thank you. So there was one note in this wine that does come from the capsicum family that when I wrote it down, I said ancho chile, so a dried ancho chile. And there is this little, and it's more on the palate. It's not so much on the nose, but it's on the palate where I'm getting this little bit of that dried ancho chile kind of energy. So there's a little kind of almost like a smokiness there, but it's really distinctive, and I really quite like it. But as I said, the palate is quite spicy. And there's a little bit of allspice here. There's a touch of clove. There's some other things going on, but there's a ton of layers to this wine, and it's really showing beautifully. And I'm happy that it is showing as well as it is today. Thank you. Yeah, this is how I roll. What temperature preference serving? That's a good question. Temperature preference for Cabernet Franc in general, I usually err on the cooler side. But again, generally speaking, if the wine is fuller bodied, you would have it a little bit warmer. So like in that 16 to 18 degrees Celsius ballpark. But I think sometimes with Cabernet Franc, I prefer a little cooler. So in that 13, 15-ish. This is probably... I'm not sure where we're at with this, but this is at a nice temperature. So this is probably, I'm kind of out on the porch right now. So this is probably in that kind of 18-ish, 16-ish ballpark. So how long does Les Picasses from 750 compared to Magnum? I've only had one Magnum of Les Picasses in my life, and that was with you, Chris. And that was in New York City. Generally speaking, I haven't had most of the Les Picasses that I've had have all been from 750s. And as a general rule of thumb in the wine world, all wines will age better from Magnum because there is a lower oxygen to wine ratio, basically. That's the non-scientific explanation of it. But generally speaking, wines from Magnum will always age better than wines in 750s. And as you go up from there, the same is true. And the same is true for half bottles. So 375s will age faster than 750s. So that's kind of the general answer to that question. I wonder if does anybody else have any questions? I'm just making sure. I've been going at this for a long time. What would be a good glass shape for Cabernet Franc? Niels, you're the best. Glass shape for Cabernet Franc. I'm using a Bordeaux stem, and I'm just using a shitty Riedel stem at the moment. If you have Zaltos, go for the Zaltos, because Cabernet Franc deserves good glassware. I just have issues with breakage of glasses, which I'm trying to fix. So I'm just using a pretty mediocre Riedel stem, and it's a Bordeaux stem. But last night I had this Guy Berthaud. This is the 2020 Les Moulins. And as you can see, I still have some left, which I'm going to retaste today. I had that in a Burgundy stem. So it depends on the wine. The Guy Berthaud style of Cabernet Franc, I don't know. Sometimes it just tastes better out of a Burgundy stem. And I don't know why that is. But that's just kind of my experience. Whereas this works for me in the Bordeaux stem. Maybe I'll play with it later. Like after this live, I'll do a little side-by-side action. That's a good question, Niels. Thank you for asking. But Bordeaux or Burgundy kind of depends on the wine. If you've got both lying around the house and you're bored and you want to experiment, then do a little side-by-side action. See what you prefer. But I would say, generally speaking, I drink out of a Bordeaux stem. And then once in a while, I switch it up and I use a Burgundy stem, Burgundy stem occasionally, depending on the producer and the wine. So, what is the oldest vintage of Les Picasses? I know I'm missing some questions here. What is the oldest vintage of Les Picasses I have? Was in 1982. I'm drinking Napa Cabernet Franc. Nice, Bailey. Someone else asked a question. Any standout notes from the 2001 in particular? This ancho chili note that I'm getting on this wine is really awesome. I'm also loving the crunchiness of it and that cooler energy from the vintage. I'm really enjoying. And the other thing that I love about this wine, I haven't really talked about the structure, but there's structure here. I think that this wine is drinking really well now. How much longer, you could probably keep holding this for a while. I don't think it's the vintage that'll go the distance, like say an 82 or an 89 or 95, for example. But, I think it's showing beautifully. And, I think you could probably hold it for another 5 years, but I don't know if I'd go much longer than that. I don't know. Hard to say. I'd have to ask me that question again in 10 years when I've had more experience tasting various vintages of these wines with a bit more frequency. But the weight of this wine is medium-bodied, I would say, and there is a nice concentration to the middle palate in terms of the fruit core. I do like there is a sense of roundness in the middle palate, which is really nice. It's giving that complete profile to the wine. But I think what's really defining this wine is there's this little rustic edge, and I mean that in the most positive way. It's like, it just screams Cabernet Franc to me in that way, is that there's these cashmere-like tannins, there's a perfume to the wine, but at the same time, it's not all glam and polish. Like there's just that humble, like your favorite pair of jeans that are probably, they've got holes in them, or they're like worn to the nth degree, or maybe it's a favorite sweater or something like that that's a little bit, kind of stretched out and doesn't really hold its shape in the same way that it did when you first bought it, but you just love that sweatshirt or you love that pair of jeans, and you just wear them and you will continually wear them until you can't. But because there's something about them that feels really comfortable, and there's something about this wine that feels really comfortable, really authentic, really humble, and I think that's what I really like about it in terms of the vintage, and comparing it to some other vintages I've had. Like I remember when I had that 82 vintage that when I was in New York City, like 82 was a warm vintage, so there was a lot of elements to the 82 that you could see you could feel the sunshine, you could feel the power. This is not about power. This is about weightlessness, about finesse, about elegance. There is, there's this very kind of delicate, tensile kind of profile to the wine. Like this is not power and in your face. It's definitely more in that realm of delicacy, finesse, fragrance, and just it's very pretty. It has a lot of pretty attributes, to use that word. I'm seeing again with the close. How does heavy rainfall vintage have a rain? Help if I could read right. How does a heavy rainfall vintage affect Cabernet Franc on the vines? Well, Cabernet Franc is a very vigorous grape variety. So if you give Cabernet Franc water, it will grow. if the soils are very fertile, it will grow. So the key thing is really managing the vine in the vineyard. So it's not necessarily a bad thing per se, because quite frankly, Cabernet Franc is not a drought-tolerant grape. So it prefers to have a bit more. Oh, Killian, thanks for jumping in. It prefers a little bit more, it does prefer more water. So it needs well-draining soils, but it also likes to be moist. Not moist, but it does like hydration. Just like people, we need water to survive. So does Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc likes water. To answer your question, Bailey, heavy rainfall, Cabernet Franc, I think in general, it's not as much of an issue. Like Cabernet Franc is susceptible to some mildews and things like this. So it really just comes down to the site and how the vines are managed in terms of just in the vineyard to kind of get rid of some of that excess moisture, if there's winds or other things to help, and how the canopy is managed to help expose the bunches to more airflow to avoid any sort of mildews and things like that. So it depends. There we go. This is when we say wine is complicated. Viticulture is complicated. So it really depends. Biggest difference between warm and cool climate Cabernet Franc? That's a good question. That is a good question. Hi, Kathleen. Thanks for jumping in. big difference between warm and cool climate Cabernet Franc. Alcohol percentage, sort of, yes. But even then, Niagara Peninsula, you can get 14s and 14.5 vintages. The Loire, you're getting, I heard, in 2022 was a warm vintage. And, people were getting 15s on some of the Cabernet Francs from the Loire, which is kind of crazy. I think Cabernet Franc is one of those grape varieties that it kind of depends. It really comes down to how the grape is worked in the vineyard, and managing the grape in the vineyard in warm climates and cool climates. It's the site. It really depends on the site. I've had excellent Cabernet Franc from warmer microclimates, places in Argentina, places in South Africa, Australia, that in your head you would think would be way too warm. Bulgari, another kind of warmer, more Mediterranean climate. And you would think, Cabernet Franc isn't going to be happy here. But depending on the site, depending on the conditions in terms of other moderating effects, Cabernet Franc is resilient. It has great acidity and great structure to it, so it can show itself well. I would say, if anything, in cooler vintages, I find I get a bit more red fruits, and then warmer vintages, a bit more dark fruits. But even that isn't. I can't say that that's a hard and fast rule, because I've had wines from warm vintages from specific sites that always show red fruit for me. A perfect example, staying in Chinon, a perfect example would be La Croix-Boissée. La Croix-Boissée is another top vineyard in Chinon. It's in the Cravant-les-Coteaux commune. The wine that I'm referring to is Bernard-Baudry, their expression of La Croix-Boissée. For me, hot vintage, cold vintage, that wine always shows lots of red fruit. So that's another example of, it's not so cut and dry as far as how Cabernet Franc expresses itself, because that one always seems to be red fruit driven, regardless of the vintage. So, there's so many wonderful people that are here. Chateau de Petit Tourard. Nice to see you guys. Someone asked about Cabernet Francs from South Africa. I have not had as many as I would love. Rat's family is near and dear to my heart. I love the wines from Houdeos Kloof, and they're in Bot River, South Africa. I recently picked up, when I was in London recently, I picked up a couple bottles of the Weatherport Cabernet Franc, which is made by Chris Keat Jr., who is the viticulturalist for Houdeos Kloof. And he's now got his own Cabernet Franc project, which was started in the 2019 vintage. So I have two examples from Chris Keat's winery, which I'm super jazzed to taste. I haven't tasted them yet. I also recently had a chance to taste the Rainbow's End Cabernet Franc, which is from Bonhoek. I did a double take there. I was like, wait a second. Where is that appellation, or what is the region? So Bonhoek is like a little sub-zone within Stellenbosch in South Africa. So I'm really excited about Cabernet Franc from South Africa. I think it's a really exciting part of where, in terms of the Southern Hemisphere, where Cabernet Franc is really starting to come into its own. So I hope I can get to South Africa sometime in the future to taste some of those wines. But lots of great examples coming out of that part of the world for sure. And Ari's here, Corey's here. There's so many awesome people here. Kevin's here. Hi, Kevin from Australia. I guess, you're now in Australia. I don't know if anybody fave Argentine Cabernet Franc. Great question, Kathleen. Fave. I gotta say, I have a small place in my heart for El Enemigo, because they are like the ones that are really leading the charge with Cabernet Franc. If you've not had the Gran Enemigo Cabernet Francs, they do now 5 single vineyard Cabernet Francs, which from different parts of Mendoza, which is amazing. Mostly in the Uco Valley. They have one that's coming from Luyan de Cuyo. I have 1 minute and 55 seconds left, according to Instagram, to wrap up this chat. So On that note, Gran Enemigo is one. I've had some other good examples from Zorzal. Catena makes a great Cabernet Franc. Zuccardi makes some great single vineyard Cabernet Francs as well. So another country that I'm super excited about, as well as Uruguay. I can't forget Uruguay. If Horacio is on this, I have to give a shout out to Uruguay because they are making some rad Cabernet Francs too. So with that said, Drew, I will address your question because that you're asking a climate change question and I have 1 minute and 18 seconds left before Instagram shuts me down. So, Drew, I will address that with you, or I'll figure out a way to answer that question after the live. But thank you so much, everybody that jumped on and endured this adventure for one hour nearly today. So I am going to be opening some bottles tonight and trying some things over the course of my evening. If you're having Cabernet Franc today, like I said, tag me, let me know what's in your glass, what you're excited about. And God, you guys are all so amazing. I'm just so grateful. This is the 2-year birthday anniversary of this effort, and I just get emotional thinking everybody is just so wonderful in this community, and I'm just from the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much for being the awesome people you are. So happy Cabernet Franc Day, everybody, and I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers, everybody.